5. Most of the time, left Alaman and then do side do. Left Alaman, read the ring. All right, here we go. Another Square Dance Callers talking tonight. I have Mr. Joe Arnold from South Carolina. How are you, Joe?
I'm doing great, Charlie. How are you?
I'm doing outstanding, brother. It's finally good to get you on here. We've met a few times and we've got to talk quite a bit. Spend some time. You're in South Carolina. One of the few times I get to talk to somebody who's just one state over from me.
That's right.
And we've been talking about doing this for a while. We finally got the schedules to match up. So we're going to talk about you and square dancing tonight and whatever else. You're a bourbon guy. We might dip into that a little bit ourselves.
All right.
Joe, you're in Simpsonville. Tell me where Simpsonville is in South Carolina.
So Simpsonville is about 15 minutes south of Greenville. So where the Caller Lab convention will be this April. So I'll only be about 15 minutes away from the convention center there.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. And so you'll get to go to that, stay at the house and everything. That works out good.
Yep.
Well, and we'll get into everything else about you like I usually do, but since we're already talking about it, when did you get into Caller Lab?
Wow. I think I first joined probably in 2014, maybe. I was in it for a couple years, and then you know how guys are. I was pinching pennies, and I thought, I don't need that. And yeah, so I dropped out for a few years, just got the license, and then after some additional recordings that I listened to given to me by Tony Oxendine, I thought, you know what? It's probably worth it. It's not that much money, and it's a lot of good resources that you can use on that site for sure.
I think I started in 2014 also. 2014, 2015. I was talking to Teresa a few weeks ago to try and figure out when I started, and she has it all. She can get it to you in 3 minutes.
Okay, that'd be interesting. Yep.
That stuff. But yeah, and it is. When I got into Caller Lab, and I've told this story and I won't go into it again, but through COVID and everything else, Caller Lab is a reason I'm still calling, I think.
Yeah.
First of all, I love square dance calling, and I've said that plenty of times, and people know that. And it's one of the things that I really love doing and working on and everything else. But just like everybody else, for a year and a half, I didn't call to anybody except my living room floor, and there was nobody there. My wife would even go to the other room because she was tired of hearing it.
Yep.
And so the Caller Lab, with some of the stuff they did online and everything else, and getting to know some of the people, like you brought up Tony Oxendine, and there's so many good people in Caller Lab that I know, and I'm sure you do too, that it meant a lot to keep me in it. Now, you brought up Tony with the music. So when did you start actually square dancing?
So that's an interesting question. I'm old, Charlie. So we started back in 1987. Sarah and I lived in a small town in West Tennessee, just north of Memphis, called Ripley, believe it or not. Population of about 7,000. So that's when we started dancing. And our caller was TJ Talley. He was from Millington, Tennessee, which was just north of Memphis, but it was a naval base, which made no sense to me, right?
Tennessee, yeah. Wow.
But he was a fantastic caller, and we just started with a whole group of us. Right off the bat, there was maybe 2 couples that had experience, and probably the other 20 did not. And it was a blast. I loved it. I didn't, the wives had to pull us to class. We did an outing with the Sunday school once a month, and the wives came up and said, we've got this plan. We're going to go to a square dance. Yeah. And all the guys are looking at each other going, yeah, we did that in high school. Don't think that's happening. And here we are. So we know who won that.
In all the years that I've been in it, and not just the calling, that's the story you usually get. The wife or the girlfriend takes the guy kicking and screaming.
Yep.
After about 2 lessons, the guy is the one that's like, no, we're going back. And the girls, they might be the ones that's not as interested anymore, but the guys want to go back. And I'm sure it's the opposite sometimes, but it's usually the guy that keeps you in it. So now, is that when you decided you wanted to look into calling? When did you decide you wanted to get on the other side of the microphone there?
So that's not the case. We were having a good time. In about 1990,
Mhm.
our caller started having heart issues, right?
Right.
He didn't tell anybody. He just one night came out and he knew which songs we liked because we enjoyed dancing to them. And he flipped us some records, probably about two or three of us guys. And he says, take a look at these. I'm like, I'm looking at it. What do you want me to do with it? And he goes, learn it. I'm like, really? For what? He goes, we're going to have amateur callers night. I'm like, okay. So we all learned our songs and we came back. And I guess after about 2 or 3 weeks, he looks at me, he goes, you're going to do some patter. I said, well, I don't know how to do patter. He goes, you're just going to get up here and call. And this was an interesting thing. I said, well, I can't resolve a square. He goes, you don't need to. I'm going to stand behind you. He says, I want you just to keep the dancers moving. Well, that's easy, right? So, and after a while, I had a couple of them paired up, and he goes, okay, do a pass through wheel and deal and the center zoom and then square through three. And hey, look who's there. I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. And probably in the next couple of weeks, he goes, I'm done. You're the new caller.
Oh man, okay.
Yes, it was quite intimidating, right? But he was a great guy. And, he was having some major problems. He didn't really, we didn't have computers, we didn't have cell phones. So there really wasn't a mentoring program.
Right.
But I did join the Memphis Callers Workshop.
Okay.
And there's still some guys in there today that I think Robert Townsend was there when I started.
So that was in the 90s. When did so you just took over that club and started calling dances for them and everything?
Yes, yeah, sure did.
Yes.
I would practice on the way to work, taking my,
Mhm.
let's see, how old was my son? He was probably 7 or 8. And, I'd have the little tape recorder because that's all we had, right? And I'd listen. And one night I'm calling a dance and my son walks up to the table and he goes, what do you call him? I said, Pretty Woman. He goes, I can do that one. I'm like, what? He goes, I can do that. I'm like, really? So I gave him the microphone and we split the singing call and he didn't miss a beat.
That's awesome.
I said, how did you know that? He goes, well, Dad, you listen to it every day that I would go to class. I'm like, oh, okay, that's pretty cool. But that didn't really last so long. I got transferred in 91 up to Michigan.
Okay.
And so we started dancing with a local group up there. And the caller, we lived really close to Flint, Michigan. And the caller there ended up getting ALS and passed away within 3 to 4 months.
Great.
And I ended up taking over a club up there. So that was a little different.
Now,
But
and that was early on stuff because you started in '87 just dancing. When when did you have start having somebody work? Did you have somebody work with you, like a mentor or anything through those years or after that?
no, the closest I got is when we would travel, we would try to find a Tony and Jerry dance, right?
Yeah.
So we'd hang out with them and I'd ask them questions. And that was one of my favorite caller stories was we were at a dance one time and Jerry Story goes, hey, come on up on stage. And I'm like, no, I can't call. He goes, no, you're not calling. He goes, here's the test. And I'm like, okay. He goes, anytime during the patter, you say now, and I will resolve the squares in 3 moves or less. I'm like, yeah, right. And I did this like half a dozen times. Now, boom, boom, boom. Now, boom, boom. And it was amazing. And I'm like, I just don't understand. And that's probably as close as I got to mentoring until 2010, 2011. And I didn't call from 93 until 2011 because the kids, they're growing up, there's too much going on, and we just dropped out. So that's kind of it.
Yeah. I had the same thing. We danced for about 4 years. from when my son was 3 to 7.
Mhm.
That's when we moved to Atlanta from Savannah, and so he was our only child. But still, he was in the band. He played baseball from 8 years old till 18 years old, and I coached most of that when it wasn't school related. And so, we just didn't. That we had no reason to. I didn't find a club up here. And after he graduated high school, and we realized that that was the biggest part of our days with our son. You know,
Yep.
and he went off to college. That's when we started looking and found a square dance group. And luckily, they were teaching lessons with like 2 weeks after we started looking, because it had been 12, 14 years
Yep.
done
Same.
anything. So we went back through lessons, picked it up pretty quick because we did dance for about 5 years prior to. Um, so yeah, a lot of people come and go like that. Dancers too. Um, the only downside is them dancers. A lot of times, the dancers when they come back, they just want to jump right in there and start doing plus and everything. I'm like, this is going to be a rough road for you. You really need to go back through classes, and most of them,
Yeah.
But that's the same thing I noticed, and I've told a lot of people this, and you may have experienced the same thing. After the about a year and a half of not calling at all during COVID, when we first started coming back, and you'd get a dance here and there, because I didn't have clubs then. Um, for the life of me, I could not remember the word coordinate. I would be calling plus, blah 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 blah, and touch a quarter. Do that thing where the center six trade. I could not remember the word, and I'd go to my phone and I'd coordinate. It took me 6 months to remember the word coordinate again. So
Yep.
you lose a lot, timing and everything else.
Absolutely.
You so you got into it. You started taking some classes. So all your pattern and everything prior to that was just stuff you were doing, working on.
Yeah.
Wow.
Only, yeah. I mean, we didn't have terminations. I had the dolls, but believe it or not, most of my practice was driving,
Mm-hmm.
thinking and trying to keep track of where people are from a move, right? And it wasn't so easy, but that's pretty much how I did it.
Yeah. I think it's helpful when you do that, or if you have checkers and you use checkers.
Yes.
Combinations is great, and honestly, as far as choreography, 70% is terminations for me, and I will push checkers about once or twice a week. But every day I'll do something on terminations for at least 20 minutes to an hour, just depending on when I was working. I did it a lot sitting at,
Yep.
you know, now that I'm retired, I'm not sitting at a desk anymore. So if we're sitting at a red light or something, I might get on my phone if I'm not driving and look at terminations a second. But you know,
Yep.
all
Yep.
those years when you started calling, any places stand out? Did you do any traveling? I know you went to Michigan just because you were living there. Have you called in any other states or anything? Conventions?
Wow. Alabama convention. Let's see. I called in Germany, actually. Not a full dance, but I went over there because I went over 6 times a year with my job anyway.
Okay. Okay.
So I looked up online and I found a caller in Berlin. And I reached out to him and I said, can I come by and dance if you guys are dancing? And he said, yes. Can you dance plus? I'm thinking, well, yes. That was a mistake.
Yeah.
So anyway, I went there and it was amazing. They only had a couple of squares that night, but the talent was amazing. I mean, everything was DVD, and I mean every plus call from every position that you can imagine. So he asked me if I wanted to call, and I think after the tip, the dancers were so bored they were about ready to fall asleep, right? Because I wasn't really challenging them, but yeah, it was fun. That was my most unique calling experience for sure.
That's
Uh,
awesome. Call out a
but
country.
those guys are talented for sure.
Yeah, I get to see. I know a few just through the calling ranks now. I've got to be friends with a few of them, Philip, Cam, stuff like that. And but watching some of their stuff, their singing calls, I'm like, ooh, I'd break a few squares down over here just with that singing.
Yep.
Um, because it's a lot of, you've got to know from every position what not just what the call is, what everybody's move is,
Hmm.
what they're doing, where you're going to end up. Um, yeah, that's a different level right there. I would
Yeah.
certainly be intimidated going to another country to call for sure. I'm
Yeah.
intimidated.
Well, it was one tip, so it was fun, and that was all I wanted.
I got over some of the intimidation here when you call it conventions, state conventions, national conventions. The first couple times at a national convention, you look up and you see 30 squares and you don't know a single person in front of you. And it's just like, oh my God, I don't know how to
Yep.
do this. But you learn to deal with that. Typically, I'd always get four of my dancers that I knew at conventions, and I would keep them with me. And I'm like, look, I'm in this hall. You be here at 9:30, and you be right up in this number one square. And that way, if I get lost, I can come right back here and know where you are. So uh, I'll look for every angle I can get.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the biggest thing is the resolution for
When
me.
was when were you in Germany? When did you call over there? About how long?
That was probably 2018, 2019, probably.
Right before
And
COVID. Nice. Okay.
yeah, it was before COVID for sure.
So now,
And
are you still traveling like that? Are you retired now? What are you
I
doing?
retired in August last year. And to tell you the truth, Charlie, I've never been busier. I don't know how I got anything done when I was working.
I agree.
It's amazing. I got so many hobbies and things going on and honeydew list. And as you can imagine, it's fun. But
Yeah, I retired in December, and it's just like that. I think since December, I've had 4 days where I had nothing to do. There's something I'm gonna, whether me and my wife go somewhere or I'm taking my square dancing to whatever level I can. I'll say, hey, let's do something on Tuesday night, and I'll go do something with that. So yeah, it's amazing how much you don't have time for.
that's right. Yep.
You know,
Yep.
when you're working, I guess you work around that, but yeah. Of course, I would rather be busy and retired than not busy and working. I'll tell you.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know what? And COVID helped me with retirement. I always worried that, I wouldn't have enough to do. I wouldn't know how to stay at home. But COVID gave me that opportunity to kind of buffer it out and get used to it. And I used to fly a lot, but then the last couple of years of work, I drove. Anything that was less than 8 hours, I drove.
Mhm.
And it was just more secure. It's not that I'm afraid of flying. I love flying, but it's just it's a madhouse at airports.
And we get kind of now what would be where you are in South Carolina if you were flying, what airport would you use?
Right here in Greenville, it's called GSP, and
Okay.
believe it or not, there's quite a few direct flights,
Mhm.
but it's a hub for American, and actually Delta has a lot of flights. So I would fly out of here to Charlotte and then take my normal flight because I lived in Charlotte for 10 years, which is where our company headquarters were.
Okay.
And that's actually where we got back into square dancing when we moved down there in '08. This is a funny story. You'll
Yeah.
appreciate it because of your earlier comments. So we moved to Rock Hill, which is just south of Charlotte. And, all I knew were work folks, and Sarah didn't know anybody. So I got online. I said, well, I wonder if there's any square dancing down here. So sure enough, a club pops up in Rock Hill, and the caller is Danny Thomas. And I'm thinking, wow, I wonder if Marlowe's there. But anyway, long story short, I said, let's go check it out. I said, we haven't danced in it was 16 or 17 years.
Yeah.
And she goes, okay, only one rule, Joe. I said, shoot, you won't call. I said, nope, no intentions of calling, never calling again, not going to do it. Okay. So we went and it did not take us long. They were dancing plus, and I would say probably within 6 or 8 weeks, we were kind of back in the groove. It was amazing, but it was fun. And we danced like that for about 2 or 3 years. So everybody in the club, we'd go to the conventions, we'd go here. And then one night, Tony Oxendine is in Columbia. we haven't seen Tony Oxendine in 17 years, right? So I said, hey, let's go to a Tony Oxendine dance. And my wife goes, hey, that'd be awesome. So we pulled up to the church and we're getting out, we're going in there. And she looked at me, she goes, you think he's going to recognize us? I'm like, honey, he ain't seen us in 17 years. So here he is sitting at the front table. And I looked at her, I said, sure looks the same, doesn't he? And we walked in and he looked up and he goes, Joe and Sarah. And I got an elbow in the side, right?
Yeah.
And he didn't say anything. So we're cool. Halfway through the dance, probably 20, 30 squares. It was a big dance. And we're in the back and he stops the music and he goes, Joe Arnold, where are you? And Sarah just looks at me, you know, daggers coming out of the eyes, right? He goes, are you still calling? Everybody in the square looks at me because they had no clue, right? And that's what started it. Danny Thomas put me on the mic, you know, for a tip or two every class or every dance, and that's kind of how I got back into it.
Great goodness.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know.
That's,
Good intentions.
you know, and I've talked about him a ton, and he's one of my favorite people in any genre. Tony Oxendine, that dude can remember everybody. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And that's something
Thanks.
I kind of try and pattern myself after him a little bit. Hopefully, at one point, 50 years from now, if I live that long, I might be to the point he is now. But he will do that. He will be if I'm dancing at some point in there, he's like, "Hey, Charlie, did you like that? Charlie, did you write that down?" And
Yep.
and I'm just like, he has the presence of mind. He will pick out dancers. It's
Mm-hmm.
a gift. And you know, I try and do it now, and as soon as I do that, I lose my corner. I'm like, oh gosh, I don't know where they are now. So because I'm thinking of something else. Oh my gosh.
Yep, for sure. Uh-uh. I do have a Tim Mariner story I'd like to tell you.
Well, let me hear it. Tim Mariner taught me to dance, buddy. I didn't tell you when we started.
Really?
Yep. When I first took lessons, and that was '94. Um, when I took lessons out of Savannah, Tim was he wasn't just starting, but he was young because it was '94, '95. Um, he came over to the club that I was. My in-laws were my in-laws said, "Hey, why don't y'all take lessons?" So we said, and they said, "This is the guy that's going to teach y'all." He wasn't the club caller; he would come over from South Carolina, and it was Tim Mariner. I had no idea who he was at the time.
Wow.
You know, I wasn't into square dancing, but I got to meet him later on before he passed, and I was happy about that. But yeah, so go ahead. I love Tim Mariner stories.
So when we moved to Rock Hill, we were only about 5 minutes from Tim. And so I took a caller school, or I tried to. I had to fly out of the country, but I took the first 2 days from him, Gene Baker, Randy Page, and
Was Paul Hensey there?
no, Paul was not there. Anyway, and I didn't explain this quite so. I have no musical background.
Okay.
Okay, so when I started calling, I couldn't two-step. I couldn't dance other than march, right? Because I could not hear the beat of the music.
Okay.
So people would ask, how do you know when to come in on a singing call? I said, well, I kind of memorized the note and I can hear when to come in. So when I was taking this caller school, Tim's trying to explain to me a sides, face, grand, square is typically 8 beats, 3 beats, sides, face, grand, square. And I looked at him like a deer in the headlights. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he goes, the beat. I'm like, don't hear the beat.
Oh.
So he played some music and I said, don't hear it. He goes, well, how do you keep timing? I said, I don't know. Maybe I don't. Anyway, long story short, he sat there with me off to the side for about an hour. And then all of a sudden, the light came on. I'm like, oh, I can hear that. Never heard that before. That makes sense now. So it all made a lot of sense. But that was probably the most profound moment in any of my mentoring that I had, because I think that changed everything for me. because singing calls were a pain to learn. If you can't hear the beat, it's tough.
That's awesome. Yeah, the reason I ask, one of the about 5 months or so before he passed, I took a caller school at Gus Baker's house. He had a dance hall in the garage. Am I thinking
Gene Baker.
Dean Baker? Okay.
Yep.
I always
Yeah, he was awesome.
okay. So it was a caller school. It was Gene Baker and it was Tim and Paul Hensey.
Okay.
And it was in his garage. He had
Yep.
like a 2-car garage. And I thought, man, this is the greatest place ever. You park in his yard and we
Yep.
went to school and one of my goals was to call a dance with Tim. Of course, that didn't happen. I found that he passed, months later. But that's awesome, man. Any other Tim Mariner stories?
Yeah. So right before he passed, he looked at me, he goes, "You travel a lot." I said, "Yes." He goes, "Are you ever home on Tuesdays?" And I'm like, "Yes." He goes, "Let me know. I got a 3-hour drive down to Hilton Head and a 3-hour drive back." He says, "You can come along and we'll talk shop." I'm like, "That is awesome." And it wasn't a week later he passed.
No kid.
Yeah. So that didn't happen. But no, his cowboy song was amazing. I don't know how he does that stuff, but yeah, he was a real, I don't know how to explain it. He was very personable
Yep.
and not,
Great personality.
yep,
Always. I mean, anything, and I didn't really get to ask him for much because I didn't know him that well. But anything when you were around, the same as Tony, he would
yep,
remember your name, and he would make a point to talk to you individually, and that was the Sun City was the
yep,
club he had in Hilton Head. I've had the opportunity to call for him once since then, and fun little club down there. And man, I wish that would have worked out for you, buddy. That's a shame. I wish you hadn't
yeah.
passed, obviously, but man, if you could have got to spend 6 hours in the car with that guy back and forth.
Yeah, because I didn't have anything else at that time, right? There was no other mentoring going on. And, I didn't have time based on work to go to colleges or things like that. Didn't have a whole lot of vacation time. So, yeah, he called for Sun City in the Charlotte area too.
Oh, did
That's where, yeah, that was the same Del Webb type of facility. And Patty Green took that over now.
okay.
Yep. So,
I went. I was over. I don't know if I don't think I've talked to you since a couple of Mondays ago. I was over. Oh yeah, I did tell you about that. You couldn't make
yep.
it. That would have been awesome if you'd have walked in and surprised me. That would have been great. But
I had some good intentions and it just didn't work out. Yeah, that's about an hour and 15 from where I live.
okay, and then it's right at 2 hours and 5 minutes roughly from
Okay.
Atlanta where I'm at. And I told my wife that after I retired, I told her I was going to travel more, and I said I will drive 3 hours one direction without getting a hotel. Anything. I'm not going to do more than that. That's just too much. I don't even like doing three. Two
Yeah.
is fine. Um, you know, I can occupy myself listening to radio or square dance music, and that's where all my singing calls come from. Right
Hmm.
now, I put it. Of course, I have it on USB now or on my phone, and I'll sit there and just sing it while I'm on the road.
Yep. Yep. For sure. Yep. So Patty Green wanted me to do a duet with her, and it was "Baby, It's Cold Outside."
Nice one. Okay, that's a chic
I
record.
have heard that song, but I've never heard it through. I couldn't imagine. It took me 3 months listening to that
Yeah,
on
it's
my
not
cell
easy.
phone,
It's
you
not easy.
know. And but it came out pretty good. But so my club is in Seneca, South Carolina,
Okay.
which is really close to Clemson. So it's right off 85 and north about 20 minutes. And they occasionally have an out of state caller if you're interested.
Love
I
to.
can pass your name along to them for sure and
Absolutely.
head over there. I'm teaching class this year, started in January, should end up in May. So, yeah.
What nights do they dance?
They dance second and fourth Fridays, but they do a Thursday, or excuse me, a third Friday dance, which I just did last week. It's a totally different format because they've got mainstream dancers and they have some plus dancers. And a lot of plus dancers come from the club that you were calling for a
They
couple
said,
weeks ago. Yeah, the pace setters. So what we do on the third Friday is we have a workshop for mainstream, 30 minutes, 7 to 7:30. 7:30 to 8:30 is a mainstream. And basically what they do is you go over the calls, and if there's any trouble on the floor, you workshop them.
okay.
Then 8:30 to 9:30, the same thing for plus. So, we had 5 squares Friday night. And then by the time 8:30 came along, we were down to 3 squares because a lot of the mainstream dancers left because they can't participate. But that's the purpose of the third Friday. And that's a kind of a little different twist from
Yeah, it's
the
nice.
uh, from the board there on that club. So I thought, what the heck? But if you want to do a regular dance, it's usually 4 or 5 tips a mainstream and a tip or two a plus, or you could do a third Friday dance, which is pretty interesting, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to do that, man. Like I say, throw my name over there. I'll do it.
I'll sure do it, bud. I will. And maybe Sarah and I can hook up with you and Marcia over that way.
Yes, absolutely. That'd be great. Well, man, with now what do you dance up to plus advanced?
Yeah.
Okay.
The only advanced calls I know, Charlie, are remake the thar and cross trail through because they were plus calls when I
Yep.
was taking lessons. But yeah, never have had an opportunity to do advanced.
Okay.
Just no time.
Yep. I get it. I'd like to be able to do it, but again, I don't have time to do it. They're doing lessons at Hotlanta. They just started about 3 weeks ago, and I was planning on going, but every Monday or Tuesday when they have it, I'm done. I've got something else going on. So,
Yep.
um, well, of those levels, do you have a favorite call?
Yes.
What is it?
It's Dixie style, which I'm afraid that Caller Lab's going to, put the kibosh on, right? I don't know. I love it though.
I don't think they will. And when we stop recording, I'll tell you why. Um, but I don't want to say it on here. But I can.
Okay.
I don't think it's going to come out. I don't. It might go to plus, but it's not gonna go out of plus. I mean, it's not gonna. I don't
Go
think.
out of the list.
I don't think it's gonna move from mainstream personally. And I'll tell you
Okay.
why when we're not on here.
But I
Um,
just like the flow of it. Like, you can flutter wheel, reverse flutter wheel to a Dixie style, and all the movements are really smooth, right? When you get there, you can do a boys trade, left swing through, girls run. It's just the flow is good, and I just like it.
I like that when there's something that everybody has their own moves, but and I tell it my favorite one is relay the deucey. If I'm on a little stage and I can, and if the squares do it correctly, it's really nice to see it flowing. And if it just happens that the squares are lined, if you've got 4, 6, 8, whatever, if they're lined up and everybody's doing it, it's one of the best looking things to me. I never thought about it, but somebody, when I was talking to them, they said grand square. And if you think about it, if you see a floor at a convention and everybody's doing it and it's tight,
Yep.
it's amazing to watch. So I like it. Dixie style. Okay.
Grand Square. So we had three nights of introduction to square dancing before we started the classes. Every one of those 3 nights, I taught Grand Square.
Yep. Absolutely.
And they all got it, and it's just amazing because the dancer satisfaction after something like that is wow, because everybody's moving different.
You know,
And
before I started teaching classes a few years ago, I'd never taught it, obviously. And when people would tell me, Patty Green would tell me that she said the first thing I teach, if I'm doing a one night party to non-square dancers, I teach that. And I just thought, oh my God, it seems like such a big task if you've never taught it. And it's
yep,
I mean, it's not very simple to do. It's not like touch a quarter where you're just like, hey, here you're turning a quarter, one wall. But when you're looking at it that way, but yeah, and like you said, when a bunch of non-dancers yet when they're taking if you show them that, they really feel like they're doing something, as opposed to right and left grand, which is
Right.
it's awesome, but it's easy and it's easy to teach right, left, rightly. That's awesome, man. Yep, absolutely. Grand.
So a guy taught a guy in our club, actually Paul Bryant Ott's the guy that told me I should do that for a one night dance. And otherwise I wouldn't have, but he was absolutely correct. But a guy at our club, Alan, said, you know what? If you think about it, there's a big square on the floor that we're standing around, right? If you divide that into four little squares, you and your corner are only working in one little square. So I got the blue tape out the first night of real class, and I put it right up front, and I let everybody do the grand square, heads and sides face, right? And then watch them as they looked at that little square that they were working on. They're either starting backing up or they're starting walking forward, but it's just that little square, and they're just with their corners, right? And I think it really helps you visualize.
No, it does. That's awesome, man.
But that wasn't my idea, but I loved it, so I stole it.
Well, now with the singing song, you said you practice a lot when you're riding around in your car. You did when you were starting out and all that. What's some of your favorite singing calls?
My first one was one of my favorites, but most people can't dance it. And it's nothing more than basic 1 and 2. It's Hey Lolly Lolly.
Okay.
It's fast. It's energetic. If people can dance it, I mean, I went from 132 down to 124 beats, and it's still tough for the folks to dance. But my all-time favorite now, most people don't like it, is Sweet Caroline. It's the beat, instead of 8 and 3 sides face grand square, it's like 8 8 6 sides face beat beat grand square, and the music starting is tough.
Yeah,
But
tough song.
and yeah, I could never have done it unless I could hear the beat. So thank you, Tim Mariner.
Very nice. That's awesome.
But that's probably my favorite.
Yeah,
I did it Friday night. I call it the South Carolina national anthem.
it is. It is. I've done it. I've never done it by myself. I'll do it with people, but they start it because once you get into it and I've got the rhythm of it, I know where to come in on all the breaks and everything. But starting it out, it's not easy.
Yeah.
Now, you lived in Tennessee, you lived in Michigan. Where are you born?
I was born in a small town in North Carolina called Grifton. Had no hospital. There was probably 300 people there, and they all worked for DuPont because my dad worked for DuPont. And then when I was 2, we moved to Nashville, Tennessee, and that's where I grew up, basically. So I grew up in the heart of the country music capital of the world.
That's where I was kind of going. So your go-to genre, if you're just riding around, is not square dancing, country.
It is not, absolutely not country. I can't stand it.
So what would you be listening to?
Rock and roll. I love 70s music. I love 60s music. Scott Bennett puts out some really good CCR stuff. I love that. Royal puts out really good music, unbelievable. But country music is low on my totem pole.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I grew up with a young girl. She went to grade school with us and sang at church on Sundays. And my dad always said if that girl would ever learn to not sing out of her nose, she'd make it. And her name was Lori Morgan.
No kidding.
Yeah. So my best friend he dated her for the longest time. She was quite wild. But yeah, I don't know. I didn't really start liking country music until I got married and moved away from Nashville. And then that was some of the older stuff.
I was the same way. Growing up in the '80s, I was all about metal, hair bands, some rap early on into that. I was a huge Beastie Boys fan, still am, but they don't put anything out, obviously.
Yeah.
Um, so I was all over the board, and I had country with my parents, but I never would choose it because I was, Metallica, Def Leppard,
Yeah.
Scorpions. But yeah, same thing. Once I became an adult, had a son, next thing I know, I was listening to Brooks and Dunn.
Yeah.
I was like,
Yep. There you go.
I can listen to this Hank Williams guy, and then I got to where I listen to that more than anything now, you know.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Wow.
Actually, that was all that really came through Savannah back in the '80s and '90s was country music and a little bit of rap, but because all the rock would go to Jacksonville.
Ah, okay. Yep.
When I was in high school, everybody would be like, "Hey, man, Friday night we're going to Jacksonville to see, Leonard Skinner," and I was like, "Who is Leonard Skinner?" Yeah,
Oh, man.
I just wasn't into it. I mean,
Yep.
and Peter Frampton and all that. They were going to Jacksonville, and so I would go. I went and saw the Beastie Boys in Savannah, in the '80s, and Alan Jackson.
Yep.
I was kind of getting into it in the '90s, and he was awesome. God, I loved Alan Jackson back then.
So my favorite band in college was back in the 70s was Steely Dan.
Okay, nice.
And, awesome music, but you can't dance to it until Ted Lizotte. So, and I think Royal put one out too, Do It Again, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, I love it. So, yeah, that's kind of stuff I like. I like Paul Simon. I like, wow. Trying to think. I went blank. Who sang Sweet Caroline? Neil Diamond. I love Neil Diamond. Yeah. And, Engelbert Humperdinck. Some of those are pretty decent. But Leonard Skinner was a fan of mine, or was a big band that I was a fan of as well. So Gimme Three Steps is one of my
everybody
favorite.
had to know Sweet Home Alabama.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
So we knew that, but again, I was just locked into the MTV '80s and growing up, so that's what I was listening to, and
so you a Boy George fan? Yeah, okay, the only reason I say that is MTV came out and we had cable TV, which I'd never seen in my life.
I am 100% a Boy George fan. I'll tell you that right now.
Are you really?
I had Color by Number, sir, the album.
So I'm feeding my son in 1983 at 2 a.m. watching MTV, and I'm looking at this band and I'm like, that has to be the ugliest woman I've ever seen in my life. So that's how naive I was. But anyway,
I'll tell you something.
I digress.
When we quit recording, I'll tell you something else about that. Oh, but that's awesome, man. Well, Joe, we talked about it in the beginning, man. We'll wrap it up. We're going on an hour now. Excuse me, I didn't want to keep you that long, but man, you got great stories. I didn't know about the Tim Mariner stuff.
Oh yeah,
and I didn't want to get out of this, and rather than doing another 2 hours, and keeping you that long, you're a big bourbon fan.
A little bit, yep.
Yeah. And the callers that have been around you and I, and especially you, are aware of what I'm talking about with that. I tell you what, just give me do you have a top 3 right now?
Oh yeah.
What are they? Because I'm going to get some.
Well, you know what? I could show you, Charlie.
Oh, come on.
So my all-time favorite is probably, if you can find it, is fairly inexpensive. It's called Elmer T. Lee. Okay. The problem is only the collectors have it. Okay. And you're going to end up at about...
Come on, man. Just walls of it.
So this is all Buffalo Trace. This is Elmer T. Lee here. So that's my number 1. This E.H. Taylor's good. Weller 12 is amazing.
Weller 12. Okay.
Yes, and they have that in Atlanta area. It's
Okay.
not cheap, but it's amazingly good. And George Stagg Jr. is pretty good. Yeah, but everything on this particular shelf is from the one distillery company called Buffalo Trace. And
Okay.
here's the newest one. This is who's the country singer?
Chris Singleton.
Singleton. Yes,
Stapleton.
Stapleton. Sorry,
That's this.
and he made this in cooperation with Buffalo Trace. This is about $35 a bottle. It's phenomenal.
What's it called again?
It's called Traveler.
I might be traveling some of that in New Hampshire with me week after next.
Oh, New Hampshire's awesome, buddy. So anyway, all these other bottles, they're from other states that I'd travel to, and I'd pick up the local whiskeys and try to just try to sample them. Now, if I have more than one or two shots a week, that's out of the ordinary. So I like it, but I'm not addicted to it.
Okay.
So I'll show you one of my other hobbies. So I don't know if you can see this or not, but this is my wood shop.
Okay.
So I just got through building some church kneelers actually out of walnut.
Okay.
And so I spent a lot of time here the last 3 months. But so that's me in a nutshell for anybody that really cares or not. Probably a lot more knots.
Well, I definitely need to get up there and visit with you some.
Yeah. So, yeah, you and Marcia need to just come over one weekend, and maybe we can go to a dance here in Greenville. Tony Simmons, who you were in class with, is an awesome caller, and he calls for the Thunderbird Squares here on Saturdays. I think twice a month. And there's another club here called 4+ that dance on I can't remember if it's second and fourth or the first and third Sundays from 3 to 5. Okay. And if you make it out this way, you need to stay at the house. So we can hang out.
Yeah, I'm actually calling for the 4. Is it 4+ or +4? I can
4+.
4+. I booked a dance with them, and it is coming up. Let's see. I think it's in July. Yeah, July 6th.
July 6th.
Yep.
Oh, you're not going to we're out of town. You know, we're going to be Aruba.
No kidding. You flying or cruising? What are y'all doing?
We're just flying. We fly down there and we get a like bed and breakfast or whatever you call it.
Okay.
And then we just hang out. There's 3 or 4 couples going down. We did that last year from the neighborhood, and it's just a blast. And the nice thing is the weather's beautiful, and the food is about the same price you'd pay at downtown Greenville.
Okay.
It's not crazy expensive, but it's phenomenal. But that's too bad, because I'd like to have you guys come over.
He gave me a couple other dates. One of them I was out of town later in the year, but
okay.
I'll because they just bring people in. They don't have a club caller yet for that club, and so I'll try and book some more. But we'll find a weekend somewhere we can match up.
Yeah, well, you can talk to Tony Simmons, or I can send you his schedule and you can look at it. Maybe just come over for the dance. I'm sure he'll be happy to let you call.
I'd love to do that. That'd be great. Yeah, Tony, he texted me or emailed me last week and said he could do a podcast, but he was busy this whole week, so maybe next week. So at some point,
he's got a lot going on. Yeah.
Joe, it has been awesome catching up with you, buddy. I guess the next time I'll see you is at Caller Lab, since it's just around the corner now. So we'll get to hang out some there. Of course, you're not staying at the hotel. You're going to be down the road, and that makes perfect sense. But we'll get some time to hang out while we're there.
So a little bird told me that
Okay.
some of the callers will probably head over to the house one day. So you need to be in that group.
I will find my way into that.
Okay. We'll let you try a little Elmer tea.
Absolutely. That'd be awesome.
Cool.
All right, buddy. Joe, it's been awesome talking to you, man. And if I don't talk to you before, I will see you at Call Lab in a few weeks.
That'll work. Good
Yeah.
talking to you, Charlie. Appreciate your time, bud.
All right, Joe. We'll see you, buddy. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thanks. Bye.
Side space, grand square, I still feel 25. Most of the time, I still raise a little Cain with the boys. Alaman left and we honky tonks and pretty women. Lord, I'm still right there with them, singing above the crowd and the noise. Four ladies chain over and back, I feel